Okay, guys, we have 5 minutes already left, so I think that most of the people who were able to join will join, and I would like to give my the possibility to start the conference to Zoya Lienko, who is co-chair of the 14th Moscow Annual Conference on the Management of the Law Firm. Zoya, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vladislav. I'm very, very happy to see everyone who joined, and thank you for your time and for joining this third event that we're hosting in this online format. As Vladislav has already mentioned in the previous event, unfortunately, this year we will not be able to hold the in-person law firm management conference in Moscow that was traditionally held in December. So, but we have decided to keep on hosting these online discussions, which the idea behind was not actually to have a traditional webinar, but to keep an open dialogue with you, because we felt like the legal community is actually in the need of an open conversation. So we highly encourage every one of you to speak up, express your mind, express your thoughts and opinions. And especially, I'm very, very excited about this particular discussion because I've always been very much of a fan of all sorts of communication questions. I think it's a very interesting topic, especially because if you think about our profession, it's of utmost importance to be able to communicate efficiently, starting from the way you present yourself, your body language, your verbal communication, your communication with the client, your communication with the colleagues within the firm, the way you present the case in court, litigation, everything. So basically, our profession does require us to be really good and efficient in communication. That's why I'm very, very happy we're hosting this event. And again, encourage everyone to express your personal experience, your tips, your tricks. And without further ado, I want to introduce the co-moderators of this discussion. The moderator will be Rupert. He's a barrister from LittletonChambers. His co-moderator is Maxim Kulkov, a managing partner of KNP Law. Both of our moderators have an extensive experience in litigation, so I believe they will be able to provide some valuable techniques how to be convincing and efficient communicating. And we're also very happy to welcome our specially invited guest, Professor Anthony Daimsis. I hope I pronounced this correctly, who is a professor. He has been a professor since 2003 in the University of Ottawa. So I'm very happy to pass the word to the moderators and let them start the discussion.
Thank you, Zoya, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to participate. As Zoya says, it's perhaps stating the obvious that effective communication is an essential legal tool. It's a tool of our trade that we deploy every day in a variety of situations, not just in court. But we rarely actually have the opportunity, perhaps even the inclination, to analyze what does and does not constitute effective communication. Often that involves a certain amount of uncomfortable introspection if you have to think about your own style and, God forbid, watch yourself on video presenting. But that is the aim of the seminar, to discuss those skills. As Zoya says, we really do want this to be an interactive event. You will all have extensive experience of the issues we will be covering, and we want you to share that experience, and I hope some interesting war stories as well. Before we proceed, could I ask everyone please to place themselves on mute unless and until you wish to contribute to our discussions to avoid any unintended interruptions. We're going to start with a short presentation from Professor Anthony Daimsis. As Zoya has said, Anthony is a professor at Ottawa University. He's in fact the director of the Common Law and Civil Law National Program at the university, where he teaches contract law, international sales law, international commercial arbitration, amongst other subjects. Of perhaps more relevance is that Anthony coaches the faculty's Jessup, Viz and FDI moot teams, and also, very interestingly, trains newly appointed Canadian judges on effective communication in the courtroom. In private practice, where Anthony also is extremely active, he acts as counsel, arbitrator, and expert in investment disputes and commercial arbitrations, and also represents clients in the Canadian courts. He's going to be sharing some practical tips about effective communication in the video conference age. So Anthony, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to the organization for inviting me here. I'm going to get my slides going. So with my time today, I thought I'd break down the 15 minutes or so talking about a few parts of communication. And as George Bernard Shaw said so aptly, the single greatest problem in communication is the illusion that it's actually been accomplished. Just because sounds leave our mouths should not lead us to assume that we're actually communicating. And so what I'd like to do is talk about some essential communication basics. Then I'm going to offer 3 quick tips from one of our former Supreme Court justices here in Canada, and of course, open the webinar to your questions and hopefully our answers, and maybe even answers from you. So the words that we use represent only a fraction of the message that we're actually communicating. Psychologists have known this for a very long time, but it's critical that lawyers start to figure this out. But figuring out how to become a formidable communicator isn't very easy. So I'm going to draw on an ancient technique that the Greeks created, and I am half Greek, so of course I've got to make reference to that. This is the idea of the via negativa, the thought that, well, it's difficult to pin down exactly what makes something great. We certainly know what makes something not very great. I think the same holds for communication. It's hard to say what is it that's going to make you wonderful, but I think we can agree on a few points that will make you not so wonderful. And I'm going to talk a bit about those. And our first task to tackle, and I'm very happy that Zoya made mention of body language, is body language. And I'd like to first talk about your appearance. And here I am not talking about your appearance in terms of being handsome or not. What I'm talking about is your general way you put yourself together. For example, if I had started the presentation today with my collar up, most likely after I said a few words, you wouldn't be concentrating on what I'm saying anymore. Instead, you might say, does he know his collar is up? Should we tell him his collar is up? Maybe we should private message him just so that he knows his collar is up. In other words, your appearance can create a distraction. And what we want to get rid of, the via negativa, is to get rid of as many distractions as we can. And your appearance can be one of those distractions. Another very common distraction is hair. How many of you have been to live or even virtual webinars where the speaker is constantly playing with their hair? You know, every 4 or 5 seconds, they just move their hair out of their eye or behind their ear. And what happens? You don't hear anything they're saying anymore. All you're waiting for is, when are they going to move their hair again? When are they going to do it? Ah, there it is. So this is another form of distraction that you have to get rid of if you want to communicate. Another kind of distraction, and this is a little more sensitive, are facial gestures. And I like to think of it as the neutral mask. This is more of an acting term, but the idea is that we all have a neutral mask that we wear when we're listening, when we're not listening, when we're concentrating. And the trick is to figure out that neutral mask and then ask ourselves, is that really the message we want to communicate? Now, if I were to ask my students, what do they believe their neutral mask is when they're listening to me lecture, I suspect they'd all say it's something like this. concentrating. In fact, having taught for nearly 20 years, I know that more often their concentration face is something like this. Now, you need to be aware of what your neutral mask is in all situations, dealing with clients, dealing with a judge, dealing with family members. And the best advice I can give you is to ask somebody you trust and don't hold it against them if they're honest with you, and ask them, so what is my neutral mask when I'm listening? So facial gestures are terribly important. That goes together with eyes. And I'll tell you a quick story. Many years ago, one of my moot teams, there was this young man who was on it, and he was very bright. In fact, he drafted most of the team's arguments. So he really knew the substance, the law, and he had no obvious problems in speaking. And yet, each time I brought a judge, a practice judge, they would rank him last. And I couldn't figure out why. I knew he knew the material. He wasn't doing anything too jarring, but the judges just didn't like him. So I decided to record him. And recording is a great tool. You really get to see what is easy to miss. And this is what I saw. Each time a judge would ask him a question, he had a very brief, a micro action that looked like this. Now that is very quick and it's easy to miss. But when I pause the tape, this is what it looked like. Every time a question was asked, this is what message he was sending back to the judge. Now, it wasn't that long, but it was a micro. And these unconscious little signals that you're sending will make the audience member feel whatever you're projecting. In this case, his face of looks like, why are you asking me questions? This is such a stupid question. That's not the message you want to send. And so recording is very helpful. And almost like magic, when I pointed this out to him and we fixed it, judges started to rank him high again. So it's quite amazing, the messages we send that have nothing to do with our words. And finally, I'm going to talk about hands. Now, if you want to see somebody who uses their hands very well, I would suggest you look at Bill Clinton's 2000 State of the Union address and watch his hands and connect them to his words. I would show you the video, but I think we have some limited time, so I just invite you to go and watch that. You can Google it. So hands, when it comes to hands, people fall into one of two camps. They either tell you, never use your hands, keep your hands on the table, or they fall into the other camp where they say, sure, if hands are part of the way you speak, use them. I mentioned I'm half Greek. My father is Greek and my mother is from England. Therefore, I speak with one hand and I can't help it. So there, I would say the right way to think about hands is this. There are three reasons why hands are okay. The first is if it's your nature to use your hands when you speak, it becomes very unnatural if you try to keep them on the table. So that's a reason you should use your hands if it's natural to you. The second reason is your audience. If you're speaking to an audience that is accustomed to hands moving, and here I'm thinking of some South American countries, even some Mediterranean countries, then somebody who is not using their hands creates a barrier, creates distance. Now, if you want to create distance, that's fine. But under the assumption that you don't wish to create that distance, you may want to think about using your hands. But I would say the third and best reason why you should think about using your hands is because hands can augment your message. When your hands track the words you're using, you're getting to send a message twice. The reference to Bill Clinton, what I'll ask you to do is look at the first time he says no. You'll notice his hand waves like this, no. And it's timed perfectly. Now, you don't have to be a ninja like him to use your hands, but simply think about your hands. What you don't want to do is have your hands doing something that has got nothing to do with your message. And I have seen this with speakers where they just lose control of their hands. So consider that as a distraction to avoid. Another point is your voice and sound. Now, if I were to ask you, how many words is, how many words is a 5-minute speech? Very few people have ever thought about giving speeches through word count. They'll simply say, oh, I don't know, it feels like this. And then they practice and maybe they hit their 5 minutes. More often they don't. Certainly in court a few times when I've been given limited time, I am trying to hit that time, that clock, but I have so much to say. So here's a trick I can give you. An ideal speaking rate, especially in law, is between 120 to 140 words per minute. Now you want to go somewhere between 120 and 140, and you want to jazz it up. You don't want to always stay at 120 words per minute, otherwise you will be quite monotone and you will put everybody to sleep. So you need to vary the pace. And my suggestion is when it's technical information, you slow it down to the 120. But when you're just giving general information, you can speed it up to 140 words per minute. And the answer to how long a 5-minute speech is, how many words that is very easy. You multiply 5 times 120 to 140, and you get your answer. And that's how long your speech should be. Now, tone. Tone is important in court and with clients, and probably all the time. So what are some tricks we can use to adjust our tone? Well, one that I use is to use contractions, it's, instead of it is. When you use contractions, it's slightly friendlier and it's a little more informal. And so if that's the tone you want to strike, consider using contractions when you speak. On the other hand, if you want a cooler, more formal tone, don't use contractions. That's one of the easiest ways to change the tone. Word choices are also important. Maybe you've heard of the Bubakiki effect. This is a psychological effect. It's been renamed that, but it dates to about 1929. And the idea is that words that have softer sounds, like buba, seem to be associated with roundness. Sharper words, kiki, seem to be associated with sharp lines. And so again, from that, you can start thinking about when you're crafting what you want to say, when you want a softer tone, you might want to think about softer words. One example, succulent versus coarse. The two words sound different and give a different effect. One is softer, one is sharper. So this is all about tone, and it's subtle. But if you concentrate and think about all of these points, then you get to communicate how you want to communicate. And I'm going to end with deliberate silence. Lawyers know that silence is effective. What is not effective is filling that silence with ums and ahs, what I call filler words. And you see that a lot, especially with younger advocates. At least I see it a lot in Canada, where younger advocates are scared of silence because they think it reveals that they don't know the answer. And so instead of just taking a moment to think, they fill it with ums, ahs, and it reaches a point where all you're hearing are ums and ahs. Unfortunately, even our own Prime Minister suffers from this problem. If you listen to Justin Trudeau, every 5th word is an or an ah, and it's very distracting, unless he's on script. So maybe the big takeaway is that people remember less about the words you say, and more often it's how you're saying those words, how you're communicating. And some would say even more precisely, how it made them feel when you said it. And so one way to capitalize this is to match your tone with what message you want to send. And the simplest example is this. If you're delivering bad news, you're not going to use happy words. And you're also not going to smile, or at least you shouldn't. So you match your wording, your tone, to the message. Now, this also means you don't need to overdo it. You know, not every contract breach will lead to the end of civilization, after all. So you don't need to overdo it either. You want to strike that right balance. I'm going to leave you now with 3 tips from one of our former Supreme Court justices, Justice Rothstein. Now, he had a peculiar sense of humor, so at first this might not make sense, but give it a moment. Tip number 1, don't give the judges your best argument first. Bury the argument so it's obscure. Judges really enjoy the challenge of trying to find your argument. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out whether it's right. Obviously, he was saying, please don't do this. I think what Justice Rothstein is getting at here is the idea of road mapping. Telling us what you're going to tell us, and make it as easy as possible for us to figure out what it is you want to say. And of course, when I teach advocacy, I always tell my students, you must lead with your best argument first, because you might run out of time. And a client isn't going to be very happy when they say, so how did it go in court today? And you say, well, if only I'd had a few extra minutes, I would have given them our best argument. You always lead with your best. A second tip, cram everything into the same thought. That way you won't forget anything. Any half-baked judge can sort out what you really intend. No, your points, and here I think it's useful to think of the rule of 3. Many speakers rely on the rule of 3. And what this is that you try to break down your ideas into 3 parts because people can take in 3. Imagine if I had said, now I'm going to share 72 tips with you from one of our Supreme Court justices. You might fall off your chair, but 3 is manageable. Simple example. Arbitration agreements under the New York Convention must be written, signed, and if unsigned, found in an exchange of telexes and telegrams. This is hard to read, or even harder to understand. Instead, if I broke that text into something simple like, under the New York Convention, Article 2, what we know is that arbitration agreements must be in writing, they must be signed, and exceptionally, if they are unsigned, they must be contained in an exchange of documents. You take the same information, you repackage it into 3 parts, and it's a lot easier to enter the mind. Final tip from Justice Rothstein is this. Assume that the judges have committed to memory all the cases you'll be referring to. Now again, this is his point to say context is important. You must give context before detail. And it's maybe not even a bad idea to give a little bit of background to the information. Imagine if I had earlier on when I talked about the Bubakiki simply said, now according to Bubakiki theory, and then went into it. This would exclude anyone who'd never heard of it. And even those who may have heard of it in their undergraduate studies might say, what was that again? Worse, it might be they know it by a different term. So instead you give a little bit of context. The Bubakiki, the idea that words that have softer tones are associated with roundness, sharper tones with sharpness. So don't assume your listeners know everything. Communication is not about you saying, look how smart I am, and too bad you're not as smart as me. It's about communicating your ideas. So in conclusion, I have a few quick and dirty tips that I always like to give at the end of any talk. When communicating, whether in court, whether with clients, at least you shouldn't read your opening words. You know, how many times have you seen young advocates do this? They look down and they say, good morning, Your Honor. My name is Anthony Daimsis. Oh, you don't know your own name? You need to read your name? At the very least, make the eye contact at the beginning. Second, quick and dirty, overviews. Always put context first, details second. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience. Road mapping, very helpful for a multitude of reasons. You tell your audience where you're going. It also gives them an opportunity to say, oh, thank goodness, his presentation is nearly over, as mine is. Keep track of your time. I a clean, concise conclusion, letting your audience know that you're done, which is what this conclusion is always helpful. So thank you very much. Now, I think we're going to open the floor to some Q&As, and I'd be happy to take them, as all of us would be.
Just to add, so you may ask your questions either in Zoom chat or just raise your hand, you know, so you just press on the hand and so you can speak as well. So if you have any questions to Anthony.
Can I raise my hand? Anthony, you had on your slide a comment regarding the camera, which you skipped, and can you maybe explain how that works? Because I have heard that often, that you should actually not look at the screen, but into the camera. But how can I basically sort of follow your presentation while not looking at you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful question. Thank you for raising it. I did. What I would say is this. I'll tell you what I do. I do two things. I'm hearing some background. Okay. I do two tricks if you want. First, you might have noticed that I'm not so close to my camera. I have a little bit of a distance. What that allows me to do is to cheat, because as I get closer, I'll move closer, you'd be able to see where my eyes are a lot easier. So the first thing I do is I create a bit of distance. The second thing I do is my camera has a little pin, but I put a little sticker next to it, because I've always found it odd to just focus on that one little pin. But instead, if I can focus on the pin and the piece right next to it, the distance is so short that people don't really notice that I'm moving away from it. And then maybe what I'd add as a third point is there's nothing wrong with actually reading, especially when you make it deliberate. It's the same in court. You know, you can just say or do this, and everyone knows that you're reading, and now you return. In fact, I think that that's even easier to deal with versus someone who's constantly staring at a screen. You almost feel like it's Big Brother watching you. So I think a mixture of the two is perfectly fine.
I think
Thank you very much.
And it's an amazing question, because I feel like it's incredibly difficult actually to look into the camera. I'm trying to do it now, but still I feel how my eyes tend to go down, just because naturally we like to see each other. So I'm trying to speak into the camera, but I want to look at you. So it's very difficult. And I want to really thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. I was writing down some tips. And I wanted to add just one thing and a question. I really like the topic of using hands, because I tend to use hands a lot. And this was actually always a doubt whether should I use hands on the camera because I'm like cut, or should I not use the hands? But in the end, I came to the idea that you should try to you know, keep yourself natural. So if it comes naturally, just use your hands. But it's interesting how you can actually spoil the whole impression using your hands, because you should also be aware of what kind of gestures you use, because you can say like this: you shall use your hands while you speak, or you can say you shall use your hands while you speak, or you can say you shall use your hands while you speak. So this, we're saying the same thing, and we do use hands, but if I keep doing like this, maybe you will dislike me for a second. So this is actually, thank you for the tip for recording yourself, because when you record yourself, you become aware of actually how you use your hands. And also, my question is, do you have any advice how to get rid of the going on all the time? Because I realized that I have it when I look at the recordings.
Yes, I do. I have a tip, and it's a tip that might cause an argument with a person you ask to help you, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. What I do with my students is I have a bucket of pennies, but you can do anything. You could take the glass and you ask someone, I'm going to start speaking. And every time I say and ah, just hit. So if you're saying, I assure you that within 2 or 3 minutes, if you haven't killed the person, you will have trained yourself to not want to hear that annoying sound, and the connection is made. You should try it and let me know how it works. I use it with my students all the time, and it really does work. As I said, it's with pennies. So I just start hitting pennies in my bucket, and they can't stand that sound, and eventually we rid them of their ums and ahs.
This is amazing. Thank you. I will try it, definitely. Thank you very much.
Anthony, I just thought about maybe to invent a software to detect this, you know, would be a really good software. Yeah, so you just record your voice, and every time when you do air, it's a beep, beep, or something like that. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
wonderful.
good idea would be.
Yes.
And I saw Rupert want to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. Or on electric shock, rather than just a beep. That'll be more effective. I just wanted to develop the conversation we're having about cameras and hand gestures vis-a-vis cameras, because we are now in a video conference age like we've never been before. And I was wondering if you had any other advice about communicating through video conferences, in video conferences, through the camera, etc.
Yes, I do. I have one, at least what I find is helpful. Now, anyone who's done any kind of photography probably knows something about a camera lens, and it applies to our lenses that we use with computers. And it's that anything, the camera notices whatever is closest to it and enlarges it. So I'm just going to move my mic for a moment and watch how the size of my head is going to change. Now that might have looked like I leaned a lot, but I didn't. The idea is that if you're leaning forward, whatever is closest to the camera is going to look larger. So I've been in COVID and I put on a few COVID pounds. Therefore, I have my chair set up where it's at a slight angle forward. I don't know if it's perceptible or not. The reason is I'd rather accentuate my face than my midsection, which I've added a few extra pounds. And so you want to think about that when you're on a camera. And this can go to also to the next level. I'm sure you've had conferences where people have their camera underneath their face effectively, which is a horrible angle. And so you really want to think about that camera angle and how you're sitting. The other point that it's very easy in these settings to just kind of sit back and slouch. Well, slouching isn't always the best way to, at least with clients, make them feel very confident about who they have. So adjusting your chair, as I said, I do it by pushing it forward. I think about my camera so that I understand what angle I'm going to come at. And so that would be, you know, something certainly that I've been thinking about over the last 4 or 5 months.
And as a follow-up, are there things that you notice more or less if you're speaking to somebody via a video conference than you would if you were in the same room as them?
I do. I notice this. So you can, if you're in the old days of being in a room with people, it's a lot easier to just sneak a peek. But look at how obvious it is when I just sneak a peek. When you're used to somebody's head more or less being straight and suddenly their head and eyes shift, and this is not a big movement, but on camera, it's a very big movement, which is why in the TV world, they're always careful about big movements because they really show up on camera. So that's what I've noticed. It's the similar effect when somebody walks in the room and you just see them do that. It's very obvious what's happening. So that would be something that I've been noticing a lot more, which for my students is a nightmare because the moment I see a student put their head down, I call on them.
Thank you.
I have a small question, if it's possible. We're actually living in completely different universe at the moment from the point of view, the system of communication and the way how we communicate. But do you believe after the situation is getting back to not completely normal, but more normal, are we going to continue this type of life and this type of approach, or people will try to get back to normal as soon as they can? And probably in other words, what would be the main changes you anticipate in the post-COVID times in connection with the communications we're going to have with our clients, with our colleagues, with everybody?
Well, I'll try to answer. Well, you know, obviously, the world will not be the same as it was a year ago. Yeah, so we see that, for example, now we are chatting in Zoom, and we haven't spent the time and money to arrive to Moscow or London, so everybody's sitting at home or his office. So it's a huge spending of time and money, and you know, that's just a law of energy conversation. It's universal law. Yeah. So if you can do something faster and cheaper, why not? But I think that increase in public events and meetings via Zoom or other software will be really considerable. But of course, not 100%, but not even maybe 80% of meetings and public events, because online conversation has a number of serious disadvantages. Well, for me, for example, if I go to a big conference, I don't know, like IBA or ABA or any other, so for me, perhaps the number one goal is socializing. That's most important things happened in the breaks and after the event. So you know a lot of people, you can meet your old friends, old colleagues, and exchange information. Of course, online meetings, they don't have such facilities, or the facilities are really limited, we know, for private conversations. Second disadvantage is exchange of energy is much less if we compare with offline conversation. I'm quite often given lectures at some, well, Moscow University and some other universities, and or seminars, so sometimes it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and I noticed that if it's offline seminar, I can speak 4 or 5 hours, well, maybe with short breaks, like 10 minutes, a couple of 10 minutes breaks, and I'm not tired. But when I'm speaking like now, offline, after 1 hour or 2 hours, I'm exhausted completely. And I was thinking about it, and I believe it's largely due to lack of energy exchange, because when you're speaking offline, so you give your energy to audience, and the audience give their energy to you, and it's really important point. Another disadvantage I see is that it's easier. It's really easy to attend a webinar. Yeah, so you just switch on your computer and you are in, and it's the same. At the same time, it's easier to not to pay your full attention to what's going on your screen. Yeah, because it was either, so you didn't pay time and money, and you don't evaluate it, you don't appreciate it really. So most of the attendees, including me, of many seminars, At the same time, checking the emails, well, just switch off the camera so the face is faded, and doing in parallel 2 or 3 other jobs. And after the end of the webinar, usually we remember maybe 5–10% of what was in the webinar, yeah, because we were trying to do at the same time at least 2 jobs, and no job was done properly. And I think this kind of disadvantages will certainly give a chance for offline events go back, but for sure not in the same amount as it was a year ago. Thank you.
So just developing that, I wonder, does anyone know whether law firms are providing any training on video conferencing techniques, on etiquette, particularly when conferencing from home? You know, are there specific rules that law firms require lawyers to abide by, and are there any house styles being imposed? Interested to know if anyone's picked up on that.
I have, this is Nicholas here. I have not heard of any policies, and certainly not in our firm. But I have done a lot of video calls, and I have seen very different performance by lawyers. So it really starts, I think, with the surroundings. And I have had quite a number of Zoom calls with people where you could actually see sort of maybe a bed in the background and pillows, and a very sort of unprofessional environment. And then, of course, you had sort of very nicely arranged backgrounds, including, of course, 4 false backgrounds, like wallpapers. I don't know, Rupert, whether these books are real or not. Behind you.
They're not.
They're not. Okay. Another thing is, of course, some people have, I mean, you have in Zoom the possibility to put on your name. And as I see here, most have put in their full names, but some people just have initials in there, which does not like really help. And certainly it's also good to have something about your, I think your firm's name. Yeah, that's why I took this this background, which on this side actually has our firm's name, because I think many people are very visual, and it's important that they not only see you, but also see your name and your firm's name, because they then maybe better remember you. So yeah, and I think if you have a policy, then this should definitely be included. Yeah, sort of how do you sort of arrange your background? Things like maybe should you wear a tie or not? I'm not wearing one. Yeah, maybe it's important also to regulate that.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned it, I think you're the first person I've noticed on a Zoom conference with their firm's logo at the side. I just noticed that because you made that point.
Yeah, actually, we did not have these backgrounds. Yeah, and when this Zoom frenzy started, I thought I need something in the background. I just downloaded our logo from Google, and it's yeah. And now I think our marketing department, after a few months, has caught on and have prepared a few sort of custom-made backgrounds for people to choose from. Yeah.
Our law faculty has done the same, slightly different, of course. And what we're doing is we have some pictures taken of large auditoriums, smaller auditoriums, our courtrooms, and we get to put them in the background to give the effect to the students that we're in a classroom. And they're professional pictures taken, and they look quite good. So I think there's some value in thinking about that.
In our firm, so there is not such policy, but I see that if you're speaking, if it's a big online conference, really big one, perhaps such a background is really helpful, so it makes it more official. But if it's a relatively small meeting, like maybe up to 40, 50 people, no more. Sometimes background like your office or books like behind Rupert or Anthony, you see that some nice pictures on his walls. So they make an atmosphere more cozy and I think much more trust, causing much more trust. So every time we have to decide which background to use.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the real world in comparison, I mean, when a client comes to our offices and to all of your offices, everything is like meticulously planned. Yeah, so the floor is wiped, and you know, the entrance, there's a carpet which is clean. There's a tidy-looking receptionist. People are led to the meeting room. Their wardrobe, their coats are taken care of. In the meeting room, the desks are clean. You get a coffee in a nice cup. You know, everything is manicured. Everything is very sort of polished. Yeah, and in our firm, we had some time ago even a consultant for millennials. Yeah, so somebody, a psychologist who understands the millennial mindset, and we asked him sort of what things are missing here. Yeah? Like, for example, millennials charge their iPhones the whole time, so they need sockets in the wall close to the table and all sorts of things. Yeah. So, but if you now compare it to Zoom, in the lockdown, all of us were like pushed very abruptly into this totally new environment. Yeah. And we had to do all these Zoom calls from home where nothing is like polished. Yeah. And you have lots of distractions, and you have pets and children. And as I mentioned, the bed in the background with the pillows. And yeah, and I think on the one hand, of course, it sort of, if you have a very good relationship to somebody, it maybe even deepens the relationship for them to see how you're living. Yeah, what are your surroundings like? But maybe for a new client, it's better to have something sort of more clean and sterile and professional, and you then have to sort of emulate what the life experience, the in real life experience that you would have in the physical surroundings.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicholas. Yeah, very good point.
Maxime, does your firm have a policy about dress? What should you wear in a Zoom conference?
You know, it's not a strict policy. Yeah, so it's almost the same policy as for offline meetings. And the policy is, so you have to adopt to your to other participants of the meetings. So, for example, if I'm meeting, I don't know, like Japanese bankers, definitely I'll be in the black suit, white shirt, and so on. Well, if I'm speaking at a seminar, like a webinar like now, I know I'm pretty sure that half people will wear like semi-casual or even home dress. Somebody will wear a tie. So it will be a great diversity. And so you see that like the best solution between three of us, so Rupert wearing white shirt and tie, but no jacket. I have that jacket, but no tie. And Anthony in a formal dress. So we can meet everybody's expectations in our diversity. So that's the rule. So you have, of course, if it's, for example, online litigation hearing, arbitration litigation hearing, of course, it's a really formal dress. But you know, sometimes you have to be less formal, again, to cause trust, to make the atmosphere more cozy.
Maxime, sorry for just a question. Is it Rupert's jacket or it's your tie on Rupert? but it's just a question.
Well,
I have a small one actually in connection with the way how we communicate with our colleagues at the moment, especially with the younger ones, because one of the concerns we got, for example, in our firm, that these remote working systems are not really kind of significantly adding to the benefits of education of the young colleagues coming to the firms. So in case you guys have any experience, what is the most efficient way of communication with the younger ones? Because as we know, we are giving them the task, they're trying to do their best, but in some cases we're quite busy, to be in routine connection with them. They're quite, if not scared, but at least shy, to disturb us all the time. So what do you think is the best way? And is it kind of technological versus kind of, emotional communication that would actually help to overcome this particular issue? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I might try to answer this question. So we are a boutique law firm, so relatively small. So it's 30 people altogether. So we opened our office 2 months ago when it became possible in Moscow. So since middle of June, so everybody is back in the office. So nowadays it's much easier. But I remember so that in spring. So how to continue in the same way? Well, first we introduced online meetings, either the whole firm or just junior lawyers or with senior lawyers or certain focus groups, usually once a week to discuss any issues. Second, we continued because some people so they got quite free a lot of time, and therefore we increased our internal seminars. So literally it was like 1 or 2 times a week. So somebody, it could be a junior lawyer, middle level lawyer, partner, certain very focused topic, and from 40 to 60 minutes online webinar, and it was really good for that time. About junior lawyers, so we also introduced a kind of anonymous questionnaire. So you can answer, you can put your name, but you don't have to. Well, to find out any problems, suggestions, and so on. And but I see that the most, of course, efficient way is tete-a-tete meeting. Well, if it's online or maybe offline, and you're asking, well, if you just ask, well, are you all right? And okay, I'm all right. Yeah, so that's it. But you have to make a breakdown of your question. So junior answering like, I'm all right, so everything is okay. I don't have any suggestions. I don't have any questions, no claims, no complaints. Everything is right. Okay, everything is right. Okay, and what about your computer? Yeah, so I see that some computers quite old and maybe it's a bit slow. Oh yes, it's slow. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, so my computer is slow and would be good to have a new one. Okay, and what about that? And if you're asking these small questions one by one, you will discover a lot of issues. So that's the way. Thank you.
If I could just add one, from a teaching perspective, one issue that I've switched doing, I started to teach online as far back as May, is my traditional method is Socratic. So when it's live, I call on students. That is not effective on an online setting, and I wonder if there is some parallel to the firms. What I've done instead is I've adopted a cool call and a warm call. And what a cool call is something like this. As I'm lecturing, I'll say, now Rupert, in a few moments, would you mind helping us tie in our readings with what we're discussing today? And I'm going to keep talking. I've given him a chance to just, think about what our readings were, as opposed to putting him on the spot. That's a cool call. A warmer call is the day before, I can send out an agenda and say, Zoya, tomorrow in class, I'd like you to take charge of our first case and give us the facts. And I could see how that could be valuable in law firms with juniors, where you give them advanced tasks so that when they come on, they're prepared, they're engaged, and they don't feel stressed about being called on. Because it's an environment is a little bit different than live.
Yeah, very, very good comment, Anthony. Thank you. And by the way, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about recording of Zoom? Well, if permissible, and if we should ask people, well, can I record it or not, and how to use the recording then?
Yeah, well, leaving aside whatever rules of professional responsibility, in Canada, we have some rules about recordings, but they're really about security more than anything else. Personally, I have two views about the recording. Recording, especially in this day and age, can be dangerous because, and anyone who's given a talk or has spoken realizes that you have less of a filter if you know that what's said is now done, almost a kind of, what is it, the Tilney rules, where you just kind of, we don't really talk about it outside of the class. There might be, in my case, I very often criticize judgments and I question how judges think about the law sometimes. I do that to try to animate a lecture to make the point hit. But if that were to get out to the public, it could land me into a bit of hot water. So recording, I'm not a fan of. The second problem with recording, and this is one that might be a little more applicable to our audience, is privacy issues. Especially if people are not using virtual backgrounds, a recording that then goes out into the ether is now exposing everyone in the audience to everybody else in the world who wants to look in. So I think that the privacy issues, I don't know that Zoom and all this virtual world has really got a handle on it yet. Most people would just say, well, just assume you're on a bus and nothing is private. I think that's a heuristic, that's a short-term approach, but long-term, it will stifle very good communication and exchanges. So I'm not a fan of the recording, but obviously when it's recorded, you're told in advance, you adjust accordingly. And I suppose that's perfectly fine, bigger picture thinking.
Well, thank you. But I think, well, if it's a big event, I don't know, like 50 people or 100 people, do you think it's still necessary to ask permission for recording? Because it's quite presumed that anybody is in front of the public here. So it's not about private life, even if a piece of my flat is behind me.
I think that's a good point. Your expectation of privacy in a large webinar is virtually zero. But I do think it's good practice. Even this seminar started by saying this is being recorded, this webinar. And I think that's probably just good practice because it avoids any repercussions.
Thank you.
I've got a question. You've touched upon the topic of criticism. You've talked about criticizing the judgments, but do you have any tips when you have to express criticism to the real person's face? So how can you be polite and gentle, but still to make your words efficient?
Well, I might start. You know, it's first of all, you know, it's a big cultural difference, say Russia and England or Canada or Germany or Austria, or, well, basically West European countries, because it's if like in Western countries, the rule is if you want to criticize somebody, well, first say two good things, then one bad thing, and then again a couple of good things. In Russia, it's quite often other way around. Yeah, so first, or just bad things and that's it. And I think, well, at least for Russian mentality, so the good thing is the combination, because if you follow here in Russia the Western approach, most of the people would be, you know, well, he's now telling me good things. Well, I know gonna be something terrific now.
So you're referring to most likely approach, right? Highly likely. Sorry.
Yeah. So people get scared. Yeah. So if you and people quite acquired to honest criticism. But anyway, any honest criticism, I think the rule is the same, but maybe the start is should be quite short, and after that, quite a short time when you telling good things. So if you want to criticize somebody, you can do it and spend it 25% of your time for criticism, but with a short start and short ending. With some good things, because if you spend half of your time and then suddenly that person will realize that it was just said just as an excuse before telling bad things, it may be even more offensive for a Russian person. So to be honest here, well, it's quite common thing, yeah. So, but when we, of course, talking to people from Western countries, or sometimes if it's a juniors, but they spend a lot of time abroad, for example, they have Western education, of course, I have to take into account this background. So Russia is Russian mentality nowadays slightly changing towards the Western way.
I think, Maxime, the cultural difference you just identified is really interesting, because it's chalk and cheese. And I think you've just highlighted how easy it is to cause offense inadvertently by adopting a style that you're familiar with and that you feel that you're confident would work in your own environment in your own country. But if you adopt it in a slightly different context, in a different country with a different culture, it will just not work at all, and will be highly counterproductive. But you know, we're talking now, we're moving, I think it's good to move beyond simply webinars and video conferencing, and we've begun to talk about junior colleagues and discussions with colleagues, etc. So I've got a question for you, and perhaps for Vlad and anyone else who wants to contribute. What style would you adopt when speaking to a junior colleague about a mistake they may have made in a case, or just generally with a client?
Yeah, I can try to start. Frankly speaking, first of all, I think that the world is getting a bit more unified at the moment, and I think that even if we are talking about some peculiarities of the national character, I think that people are actually accepting and absorbing a lot of international culture. So a lot of things that we probably didn't see before, even in, for example, Russian-speaking countries' culture, they are much more kind of common now. And in many cases, I believe, in many cases, they should be also kind of introduced by us as kind of senior people in the firms, in order to kind of, to develop our firms and to become more international from the point of view of the approach. And with regards to the communication with the junior people, I think, in many cases, when you want to criticize, it of course depends on the personality, because some people do need some kind of strong push. Some people need some kind of, gentle guidance, and some people are very kind of anxious, and we need to understand that they may be quite vulnerable if we're talking, in a kind of a bit more harsh manner to them. So I believe that on one side, we need to take into consideration whom we are talking to, but on the other side, what is really important and what I see is kind of very influential and efficient, at least in my experience, is that you're asking questions. You are trying to ask questions and you are trying to see answers, and you are kind of trying to push the person into the right direction, not just, you know, by saying you did it wrong and you couldn't do it this way, but in many cases trying to ask what exactly would be the outcome of this, how exactly the person believes this answer, for example, will, you know, support the client, what exactly would be the provision of the law in this connection, how it corresponds to the answer. So when you're asking the questions, you are in many cases offering the possibility to the person to consider the mistake, and then potentially to actually to get it much deeper and much more, I would say, efficiently to understand the mistake and then not to repeat it. But as soon as you are just, you know, correcting the mistake in a very straightforward way, sometimes it doesn't work because they don't consider this as a mistake. They consider it as a personal influence. And in many cases, they're trying to find this as an excuse. I did everything right. And, you know, this guy is just pushing me, and that is wrong. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah, I quite agree. So I think most important thing is to identify the reason of this mistake, because unless you identified the reason, you cannot be sure that the mistake will not be repeated many times. So that's if you construct the way of speaking, not like emotionally, like why and you made a mistake and about qualities of that person, but focusing on the reason why did that person make such a mistake. This makes the whole conversation much more I would say much more constructive in a business way, not about emotions, not about if it's a bad people or bad person or a good person, but and this is a most I would say practicable solution. So let's when I'm talking with a junior, so let's try to identify how did you make it. And what can we do to avoid similar mistakes in the future? So this makes the conversation much more friendly, actually.
Yeah, along those lines, it's how I never like to say no to a judge. And I've adopted that with my students because a no is so harsh. So I find different ways of getting to my point. Instead of saying no, I'll say, well, not quite. Or I'll say, well, I would have seen it this way. And with my students, I often use the why and the what if approach. So when they're telling me something and I think it's absolutely wrong, instead of just saying that's ridiculous, I'll say, well, can you explain a bit why? And then they start telling me why. And I'll say, well, now what if, and I'll inject a fact that is probably the right fact. And now I get to see their reasoning. And if their reasoning ends up being correct with my what if, then I've identified that they've just misidentified a fact. If with my what if they still don't understand the reasoning, then I know that it's a reasoning issue. So I always use that style of approach. And I just wonder if it could be adapted with juniors.
Well, I think, Anthony, why not? It makes perfect sense. What you just described, I can easily envisage working in a conversation that you're having with a junior about an idea that you disagree with, but gently steering that junior to the right answer if they've got the wrong one, but in a way that is constructive. So we've been talking about communications with colleagues and junior colleagues. What about clients? to what extent do we need to adapt our style of communication to the type of client that we are dealing with? Any thoughts about that?
Okay, I'll try to start. Of course, and it's a very important task to collect as many information about your client as possible before you meet them. Well, in case if it's a new client. And you know, nowadays it's quite easy to collect such information through the internet, Facebook, and other networks. Because definitely, for example, if I'm meeting a head of a construction company, so who flying twice a week to Siberian towns and talking to his men there, and back in Moscow maybe for weekend. Of course, it's a one way of communication. So because he's usually kind of a brutal man, yeah. And as I already mentioned, if it's a Japanese banker, so it's a very different way of communication. So here I believe that there are very few universal rules of communication. So most of the rules, they've dedicated to a certain type of personality. So therefore, it's extremely important to understand who will be your the person you're going to talk to. It's the same rule about judges, arbitrators, general audience. For example, for this webinar, so we asked the organizers to send us a list of attendees, generally to understand if I have any familiar names and who is the audience in whole. Of course, there's no time to check everybody here, all 40 participants, but at least to have a general pictures who is the majority of attendees.
Yeah, that's a really good point, to know your audience and to get a bit of a background. It applies with clients. For example, when I speak with clients who I know are not law-minded, I drop all the legal jargon. If I were to speak with another lawyer, I can use legal terms because it's a shorthand. But the moment you're dealing with a client, you know, and the classic case for a common law, and this can even apply to this audience, I know the majority of our audience is civil law. And in common law contracts, we have, of course, the offer and acceptance, but this funny thing called consideration. Now, consideration as a word, if you tell a client who has no background in law, your contract fails for consideration, they're going to look at you and say, no, I thought a lot about this contract. So then you have to unpack it. So you don't want to use jargon when you're dealing with non-law people and even different legal traditions. Consideration probably doesn't mean a whole lot to civilians, just like koza doesn't mean a whole lot to the common law lawyer. So even amongst lawyers, you have to be careful of that language. So definitely adjusting language to your audience is critical. The default for me is always make it as simple as you can and as clear as you can. Forget the jargon. But I think as a younger lawyer, I was probably tempted to use legal terms as a kind of blanket of protection to show, see, I'm really a good lawyer. And as I got older, maybe because I don't care as much anymore, I just figured, look, I'm just going to tell it to you straight. This is what it is. And there we go.
Guys, we have probably time for one more question, and then we need to wrap up.
Well, I just got a comment flowing from what Anthony has just said, and also Maxime. The clearest difference would be if the client is an in-house lawyer with a company and a businessman. The owner of the construction company who flies frequently to Siberia, the way that you would explain the legal position in a dispute or in a transaction to that person is going to be very, very different to the approach that you would take with the in-house lawyer. And in particular with the in-house lawyer, you'd go into more detail, I imagine, about the law, the relevant articles of the civil code, if it's a common law lawyer, the case law, and you'd unpack it in much more detail. But with the owner of the business, he just wants to know what's the bottom line, and you need to get there as quickly as possible, identifying all the major issues before you reach your conclusion, but don't dwell too much on the minutiae.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you. And first of all, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Maxim and Rupert, for organizing this and for making such an interesting discussion in connection with what and how we shall talk to each other and talk to the judges and talk to the students, sometimes probably even talk to our children. I think that Zoya has a specific task for tomorrow morning. As I'm not mistaken, Anthony said that she is going to present the case during the lecture. But otherwise, I think that we still, everybody of us got quite significant information and something to think about. And I'm sure that this would be very valuable for us and maybe to share with our colleagues and friends, you know, because this information sometimes is not kind of very natural. And in many cases, even if we know this or kind of we feel something, it's very good that we're able to formulate this and we're able to kind of, you know, to put this in very particular words, because that helps us, you know, to develop ourselves and to improve our communication skills. So I personally believe that it was absolutely excellent discussion, and I hope that, you know, a lot of participants who were able to join us got their knowledge and additional knowledge and experience from that point. They will be able to use their in their own work and life. I would also like to mention that our next discussion is September 10. It's going to be connected with the future of the law firms, strategy and solutions. We will have quite an interesting discussion that would be moderated by Evgenia Bondarenko of Uniconsult. It's a Novosibirsk law firm with a very good knowledge and experience in the developing and managing law firms. And Zoya, who you all saw and heard today. So I'm sure that the discussion would be very interesting, especially because one of the supporting people for this event would be Norman Clark from Walker & Clark, one of the most knowledgeable and experienced advisors to the law firms. So I would like to thank all the participants. I would like to thank moderators, and I would like to involve you and, you know, to invite you to the next event that we're going to have in 1 week time. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you for giving this very, very valuable contribution. Thank you.
Before everyone leaves, I want to use a word. I want to use actually this opportunity to set into practice one of the things that Anthony taught us today, and exactly the warm call system. So I want to use this opportunity for everyone who is still on the call and is planning to join the next week call, since I'm going to be moderating this call. So I want to give you a task for the next week. I do encourage everyone, since we're going to be very imaginative, we want to use our imagination to imagine what the future law firm is going to be like, maybe not tomorrow, maybe in 10 years. So please think about your craziest ideas. And I encourage everyone to share these most crazy ideas of what the firm of the future will be like at the next call. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Use my hands.
Super. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.